Obviously, no nation is eternal. But here we're dealing with the assumption that what we will see in 2040 is going to be a China that has risen beyond the United States. And what I'm pointing out to you is it could happen, but it is very unlikely given the circumstances. We see that China is the largest exporter in the world. It exists off of exporting. And we know other countries that have lived that way. The China of the 1890s was the United States. A massive exporter to Europe, highly dependent on Europe's ability to buy and sell. And when Europe couldn't buy and sell, it fell into a depression. The problem of any exporter is he depends on the ability of his customers to buy. And the problem of China is that its biggest customer is the United States. The United States is the largest importer in the world. And China is a country that would like to develop internal consumption. But given the vast poverty of the interior of China, that's very hard to do. And certainly very hard to do at a time when its major customer is refusing to buy unless China changes its own terms of how they buy. We speak about China's growing military power. Well, what is it that they have? The United States has a strong alliance with Japan, a strong alliance, I hope, with South Korea, relationship with Taiwan, something or other with the Philippines that's hard to figure out, decent relationship with Indonesia, with Vietnam, a decent relationship with India now, and of course Australia. China has one formal international ally, Pakistan. Most of Southeast Asia, except for Cambodia, distrusts it. South Korea distrusts it. Japan distrusts it. So the alliance that the United States has isn't shaped like NATO, but is enormously powerful. The economic power of this alliance, the military power of this alliance is significant. China faces these all alone. Now, China all alone is a lot of people, but it has to be understood that China must export to maintain the stability of its economy and its financial system. And if it can't, then it's terrified. And this is why it's so interested in the South China Sea. China's fundamental fear is that the United States will blockade its access to the world. This is why it is trying to figure out a land route to Europe. Very difficult to do. The Chinese want the United States to push back, to get back away from the boundaries of the ocean east. It wants the United States to cede this region. The United States sees no reason to do that. It doesn't feel under threat from the Chinese military. It doesn't believe that China can possibly mount an invasion of Taiwan. Amphibious assaults are extraordinarily difficult to do because the ships can be bombed in the port on the way there. They then have to land everybody and have them fight forces, and they have to go back. In all these places, the 6 amphibious vessels that the Chinese have are highly vulnerable. And China is not a country that wants to take a risk on this. So China is in a difficult position in relationship to the United States. The United States has placed essentially an embargo on some goods, not all by any means. The United States has not blockaded China, but potentially could blockade China. And so when we look at China, I see it by being stupid. Pardon me, a country that's embattled. Internally, it is facing crises in its borderlands, Xinjiang, now Inner Mongolia, problems with the Indians, problems in Hong Kong, of course, that you've all seen. We see a significant problem on the part of China. Yet the public opinion is that China is on the rise and the United States is in decline. So China has a fraction of the American GDP. China has a fraction of America's financial capabilities and a fraction of the military. So why do we see China as declining rather than the United States falling? Because the United States is a mess. When you look at it internally, we are in one of our periodic periods of chaos. And it's assumed that that period of chaos translates itself into a reality. But the reality is aircraft carriers that won't dissolve because we have silly things being said by politicians. We have an appetite for product that won't disappear because we have silly politicians and so on. We have to look at the objective characteristics of national power.
I look at China, and what's interesting is the manner in which the system spasmed. It didn't know how to deal with it. That first, apparently, Xi knew about it or didn't know about it for 2 weeks and did nothing publicly because he was doing brilliant things privately. Then they began to cordon off entire cities. So when you look how a natural disaster is handled by a government, well, it doesn't tell you much about the natural disaster. but it tells you a great deal about that government. Our view of China has always been that it was vastly overestimated in its modernity, that it had an extraordinary period of economic growth, but that it was a dead cat bounce. That is, it left in such poor conditions by Mao that they were going to grow. And that as they grew, massive dysfunctions within the economy and within the relationship of the economy to the government were revealing themselves. Well, that really is a question of what is the relationship of the government to the people. And the coronavirus tests that. And we see what the government is. It is falling back on its comfort zone of repression. And that's China. So yes, it tells you a great deal. And whether it speeds up the compression of China, the decline of China, if you will, that's important. But China had topped. China could not sustain itself at the level it was. It was going, as Japan had, going backwards. And the only thing the coronavirus does then for them is speeds up a process that was already underway. We feel a moral obligation to invent. Our obsession with the technology, the obsession with the structures that we change, and this is who we are. Because all of us came from a place that didn't want us there, or where we didn't want to be. We are all, no one said, well, I have $50 million, I think I'll become a settler in the Midwest. We came here because we'd failed elsewhere. And we came and reinvented our lives. And there was a huge degree of amnesia in that, or changing memories where things were worse than they ever were there. But we have a strange relationship to reality because we're moving away from it. Well, as we've succeeded, the impulse to invent, to reinvent, is always there. And all inventions and reinventions reach their endpoint. And those of us raised within the context of one technology, one regime, one economic process, feel an enormous loss when it leaves, because that's what comforts us. And they always leave, and they always change. And so we must reinvent a new life. And it's a period, it's something within the American soul that is urgently trying to create something new. And the tragedy of American life is that the thing that's created always becomes obsolete. And when it becomes obsolete, as this period has, then there's rage, and there's sorrow, and there's the conviction that this is the worst of all times.